I'm gonna say this: every empires typically last about 250 years, and America is 249 years old. I'm gonna just leave it like that. All right, what's up, y'all? Welcome to another episode of the Afronomics podcast. So it's just me today, Sitta, your favorite host, and I can say that with impunity because the other guy's not here. But basically, this episode gonna be a little different. So in this, I've been doing a lot of research, and it's gonna be like just real conversational, real chill, just kind of off the cuff. Basically, in this episode, we're gonna talk about 7 reasons to invest in Africa, like right now. And I got actual research. I'm not just talking out the side of my mouth. I got some stuff that I looked up. I think it'd be very interesting for anybody that's in the investment space, anybody's looking to do business or just like Africa in general. But I'm gonna break down some actual facts, and we're just gonna keep it real light, real conversational. So first, I gotta start by saying a lot of people don't know this. 1 in 4 people on Earth will live on the African continent by 2050. 1 in 4. Like that's huge. A lot of people don't understand just like population growth and the dynamics behind that. But if you're starting any type of business, just think about the amount of consumption you can get when you have such huge population growth. And we're also seeing a huge shift in demographics and investment. We're seeing a lot of different leadership changes in Africa. Think like Ibrahim Traore, the Sahel states, and Ghana, and just a whole lot going on. And then like in the current superpowers, like we all seeing what the hell Trump doing. We all suffering from that in a lot of ways. Some ways, it's a little questionable. Nobody knows what's going on. And I'm gonna say this: every empires typically last about 250 years, and America is 249 years old. I'm gonna just leave it like that. So you're looking at it from a perspective, it might be about time to start making a change and start looking at things elsewhere. We're seeing people go to different countries, but I'm gonna actually break down some demographics or and some stats and give you guys some information. So I ain't just no slouch. I actually worked in research and development at the corporate level for a Fortune 100 company for a while, so I understand a little bit about being able to pull together data and use data to tell a story. I also try to travel to Africa a lot, so I might know a little something, a little something. So I'm not just making stuff up. All right, very first point I want to bring up, as I kind of alluded to, is population growth. So Africa's population is exploding. It was 830 million in 2000, and it's 1.55 billion now. It's going to be 2.5 billion in 2050. And that's also a lot of the world's working population. So Africa has the world's youngest population. The average age in the U.S. is about 38 years old. That or the median age. The median age in Europe is 43. The median age in China is 40. The median age in India is 28. The median age in Africa is 19. It's the youngest population by far, and that's because their birth rate is so high. So if you look at it from a population standpoint, we not birthing no babies. That's one of the, I mean, I'm a conspiracy theorist, but that's I think one of the reasons that they did the whole abortion ban. We not having babies, especially like white women be having abortions more than anybody. But anyway, we not having no babies like that in America. The population is only growing because people are moving in. It's not a matter of we not having enough people to have enough babies to replace our population. But in Africa, the birth rate is so damn high that even though people are moving out more than they're moving in, they're still seeing rapid population growth. So like they have a whole lot of stuff going on, and they have a market for it, and that market is growing. So if you put together any type of technology, even stuff like content, like their adoption of technology and being able to have access to smartphones, that's also going to grow. So anything that you create is going to have a market, and it's going to have a growing market in Africa. Right now, the market is in the U.S., it's in Europe, but the market is going to be in Africa in quite some time, like in the next 25 years or so. They also have a large young labor force. So like I said, 1 in 4 people on the planet are going to live in Africa by 2050, but 1 in 2 of the world's workforce is going to be in Africa by 2050 because of how young the population is. Like there'll still be more people in other countries, but a lot of them are going to be older, as I mentioned, by just some of those demographics. So you're going to see a lot more young people, a lot more working people, and a lot more consumers in the African market. So it's definitely something that you want to look at when it comes to investment and creating a business. Number two, economic growth. So African countries dominate the world's fastest growing economies. So of the top 20 economies in the world with that are ranked for GDP growth, Africa has 12 of the top 20. Uh, and these, not all of them are small. Some of them are smaller countries, but you got countries like Uganda, Sudan that are around 50 people or 50 million people each. So you got some larger countries, and they're rapidly growing. Even Burkina Faso, I think their GDP is growing like 17% in 2 years. So if you look at just economic growth, Africa is leading the world and all of that. Then they also have, they're rapidly urbanizing. So everybody got this stereotype of like Africa being, rural, is, not a lot of technology, they ain't got no cities. I'm African. I done heard so many times where like I tell somebody I'm African, like, oh, you lived in huts? And like, no, no, no. That we actually have, they have cities, and the cities are growing very, very, very fast. By 2050, Africa is gonna have 159 cities with over a million people, and 17 mega cities with over 10 million people. Put things in perspective, there's only like two, maybe three cities in America with more than 10 million people in the metro: New York, LA, and maybe Chicago. But Africa's going to have 17 by 2050. And a big part of this is fueled by the labor shift. So a lot of people move from agricultural work, they're moving to more like white collar jobs, people moving to tech space, working in offices and cities. So the cities are rapidly urbanizing. That's going to mean that a lot of those cities are going to need more infrastructure and development. They're going to need more energy infrastructure. So if you're investing in any of these sectors, these are going to be great place for you to put your money and start looking at. All right, another thing, they have a growing middle class, and it aligns with that urbanization shift and the job shift. So they have a growing middle class, meaning people are moving from lower income to middle income or like middle class status, which means they have a lot more spending power. So that's going to have huge implications because that's going to create more consumers that can buy whatever it is you're selling in these markets. Yeah, one of the key things is total household consumption is projected to be over 2.1 trillion by the end of 2025 in Africa and 2.5 trillion by 2030. Spending has grown 150% faster than the population. So again, more buying power. Number three, there's a lot of untapped markets and underdeveloped markets in Africa. So as I mentioned, like with the cities growing, there's going to be a huge need for infrastructure, both physical infrastructure, housing, building, office space, and then you're also going to need the energy infrastructure. There's a lot of issues in Africa when it comes to power outages and energy, and you run out of power. You're going to need solutions. They're going to have to build solutions for that type of for to keep up with the demand as the population is growing. African Development Bank is estimating the infrastructure gap at over $100 billion a year. So there's a huge gap, and if you're in any of these sectors, you can fill that gap and you can make a lot of money. One of the things that they're doing is the African Continental Free Trade Area could drive a 50% increase in demand for transportation infrastructure. So if you're in that sector, there's going to be a lot of opportunity there. And then also agriculture and food. So this is a crazy statistic, but Africa is a net food importer. Africa has 60% of the world's arable land, meaning you can grow crops. They have 60% of the land on the planet that you can grow crops on, and yet they import food. If you could find a way to create food or to take, grow crops and then refine those crops in Africa and then sell them to the local population, you can make a killing. Like you already have demand right there. We had a previous interview with Abdul Diallo, and that's one of the things that he's working on. Is why he invested in a farm, and he 4x the value of his farm within 2 years. There's so much demand for food, and there's so much land to grow the food that it's a no brainer. So if you want to get into agriculture, Africa's a great place to be. You got a market, you got demand built in right there, and then you got the land to do it. Oh, another thing, as far as untapped and undeveloped markets is mobile use adoption. So there are around 650 million to 700 million mobile phone users in Africa, and that number is like rapidly increasing. That's less than 50% of the population right now. By contrast, 98% of Americans own mobile devices and 90% of Europeans. So think about when you have technology that's mobile focused, whether it's like, how to pay people or social media or content, these markets are growing in Africa. They're rapidly adopting mobile phone use. So if you create content, if you create software or fintech, anything that's catered towards Africans, not only are you going into a market where the population itself is rapidly growing, the adoption of mobile phone users is rapidly growing. So your consumer base is going to expand like crazy over the next decade and a half, next 20 years. So the upside is there. Like a lot of things in the US, we it's kind of saturated. Everybody here already got a smartphone. Everybody's already using all the different apps. So going to a market where you have first responder or first movers advantage. You pioneer market, you can go into something, create a solution, and then people adopt it. The use is gonna grow like rapidly. Then you got other industries like fintech, health tech, e-commerce, retail, consumer goods, renewable energy. All of these markets are growing very rapidly. So you just gotta look at where the upside is. It's, you can make a lot of money in the US, you can make a lot of money in Europe, but as far as like upside, 10x and 2800x like unicorns, a lot of the unicorn companies about to be in Africa in the next 20 years just because of the upside in the market. And everything's so affordable now, so your dollar goes a lot further. All right, number 4, affordability. So I'm going to give you a few cost of living comparisons. So this is monthly cost of living for a family in the US is, and every number is a little different. Every city in the US is going to be a little different. Everybody has different lifestyles, but just based on like the averages, the average cost of living for a family of 4 in the US monthly is about $5,800. This comes from livingcost.org. In Nigeria is $2,279. So less than half. South Africa is 2166 a month. Kenya 1895, so less than $2,000 a month. And Sierra Leone, where my family's from, 1640. So the cost of living is like mad low compared to like the West, US and Europe is mad low. So that means that everything, not just cost of living, but everything is more affordable. Yeah, you got, aside from housing, African countries are more affordable when it comes to food and healthcare too. Better affordability means more discretionary spending. So not only can you get your, supply demand or any type of business, you got maybe raw materials, you got to pay for labor, you got to pay for land, whatever it is you got to pay for. The expense side for your business is going to be lower in most African markets. So that's one thing to think about. You can get in at a cheaper cost, and then the consumer base has more discretionary spending. Even like from a land standpoint, you can acquire land and other assets much lower price point with higher upside. Again, that upside, if you're buying something in like Sierra Leone as an example, and the population is rapidly growing over the next 10 years, if you buy land in a decent area, the demand for that land is going to go up like crazy. So it's just going to be a lot more upside and the value is going to increase on whatever it is you're doing. All right, number 5 is natural resources. So here are a few statistics on just like the resources that are available in Africa. 40% of the world's gold, 90% of the world's chromium and platinum reserves. DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, alone holds 60% of the world's cobalt, and Africa altogether holds 90% of the world's cobalt. So a lot of y'all, you may not know like what the hell these resources are, but think about like stuff like your smartphone. Cobalt, coltan, these things are like you wouldn't have a smartphone without these resources. So we wouldn't have phones if it wasn't for like the Africa or the Democratic Republic of Congo, and they wouldn't be as cheap as they are. So if you look at it from a resources perspective, Africa really has a lot of control over how the rest of the world functions. And the only reason Africa isn't as rich as it should be financially is because they don't own the control of those resources a lot of times. But that's going to change, and I'm going to bring that up in a later point. As I mentioned earlier, that Africa also has 6% of the world's arable land, and you can grow crops there. So if you're looking at population growth in general, people got to eat something. And if Africa has a lot of the land where you can grow crops, that puts them in position to really be able to provide a lot of value to the rest of the world, and they can control those resources. And that means that the rest of the world is going to need to go through Africa in order to sustain their populations. Africa also has the largest reserve of diamonds. If you've seen the movie Blood Diamonds, that's from Sierra Leone. And then Botswana is the largest producer of diamonds in Africa and only second to Russia across the world. They also have the largest reserve of uranium, which is used for power and everything. And Africa hasn't controlled these resources in recent history, but we're starting to see a shift there. All right, number 6 is going to be foreign investment. So everybody already knows this. China, Europe, USA, they invest heavily in Africa. And even when they're not investing, they're talking about giving aid. That's not really an investment. All of that is just allowing them to get resource control, as we talk a lot about that on this show. So all the foreigners know it. Everybody except like Africans, African Americans, Africans in the diaspora, everybody already knows that Africa is like incredibly rich and valuable. But they paint this picture of how it's poor and there's no development and there's no intelligence. They paint this picture because they don't want us to actually go there and invest. They don't want us to go and be a part of it. They want us to look at it as poor and not valuable, because then that keeps us focused and putting the US on a pedestal, putting Europe on a pedestal, or other countries, rather than going back and taking full advantage of all the resources that we have in Africa. They control you with the mind. It's a lot of what we talk about. Like a lot of the media is used against us, whether it's film, rap, social media, all types of content is used against us to make us think a certain way. But Africa is very much rich, and everybody understands this, which is why they're spending an incredible amount of money to invest in it. Investment is growing in 2024. There was a record 94 billion in foreign direct investment. China is typically one of the biggest investors. They invested 72 billion from 2014 to 2018. Around 20% of they say sub-Saharan. I don't like that term because it tries to make the rest of Africa and North Africa different, even though it's all Africa. But 20% of sub-Saharan Africa's exports go to China. About 60% of African imports come from China. And a lot of their investments are in mining, infrastructure, industrialization. And China, which is currently the world's factory, relies heavily on Africa's resources to be able to produce whatever it is they're making in those factories to then sell to the rest of the world. My brother always says this, like currently the market for consumption is in the West, US, Europe. The market for consumption is predominantly in those markets. And the world's factory is currently in China. Production is in China. In the next 20 years, both the market for consumption and the production of goods are both going to be in Africa. So you gotta go where the puck is going. Another country, UAE, is stepping up its investment as leading the world in foreign direct investments in Africa as of 2025. Emirati companies announced $110 billion worth of projects in Africa between 2019 and 2023, and pledged another 97 billion in the last 2 years. The U.S. is still a strong investor. They invested 65 billion since 2022, and Europe invested 53 billion in 2023 alone. But foreign direct investment has declined since. All right, and the last point is African sovereignty, and this actually might be the most important one. So as I mentioned earlier, Africa is very resource rich. Africa has a growing population, and there are a lot of untapped markets in Africa. But one of the biggest things as far as like why you should invest in Africa and why now is the time is now the shift in the political climate. So we talk about Ibrahim Traore and the Sahel states on this show a lot, but they're literally shifting the way that things work. They're talking and they're actually doing what they say, where they're taking control over Africa's resources. They're reconfiguring their contracts, they're nationalizing mines. So essentially, they're saying we're going to take control over our natural resources and then we're going to sell them to you at the price we see fit, as opposed to selling the value for pennies on the dollar of natural resources to other countries where they refine it and then sell it back at a huge markup and sell it to the rest of the world. That's one of the biggest things. And then it's a lot less colonialism going on. There's been, like, Africa's been colonized even when they countries became independent. It's still been colonized the whole time. Now we're starting to see a shift, and it's only a few countries, but that's all it takes to get started. Because as you see these countries improve, as I mentioned, Burkina Faso's GDP grew 17% in 2 years. As you see these countries improve, that's going to put pressure on other African countries, because revolution always starts with the people. So as people see the benefits, people in other countries see the benefits of the people in Burkina Faso, Niger, Mali, even Ghana and Senegal are making strides. As people in other countries see these benefits, that allows them to apply more pressure to their leadership, and allows the leadership to actually shift in favor of the people. A lot of times it's hard to be a leader in a country where you're trying to make a change but don't have the support of the people. A lot of times the leaders get assassinated. Somebody switches up on them because Europe, Israel, America, they all benefit from Africa being exploited. So as Africa talks about becoming independent and becoming more autonomous, they've always assassinated leaders. So it's very important that you have the support of the people. We talked about this in our episode with Ibrahim Traore, where somebody offered one of his bodyguards $5 million US to assassinate him, and he turned it down. Stuff like that is huge. When you got the support of the people, you can really start making changes and do things that's going to benefit the country long term. We've had that before. Patrice Lumumba, Muammar Gaddafi, Kwame Nkrumah. A lot of African leaders, a lot of Pan African leaders have been assassinated or exiled. The list goes on. But the Sahel states is different. One, they work together, and there's three of them, and then you're seeing more leaders pop up at the same time that are moving in similar fashion. So it's hard to, you can't just kill everybody. And another big thing that's different now is social media. Because we have democratized the spread of information, it's a lot harder for Western media, the BBCs of the world, the CNN. It's a lot harder for them to paint the picture of here's what here's what's going on. They painted Muammar Gaddafi to be a villain. So when they killed him, people didn't protest as much. But now you got supporters of Ibrahim Traore around the world to where everybody knows what's going on. And then if they were ever to try and do anything, there's a lot more support. There's a lot of people that can step in and fill that role. And then we all know the truth, and people actually be more invigorated to revolt and take back control of African resources. So we're seeing it in mass. A few things that we're seeing: they're expelling French troops. They're ending the use of the franc. This is specifically in Burkina Faso and the Sahel states. They're actually not even using the French. They removed French as an official language. So now they're starting to use their own languages. They're aligning with countries like Russia for support instead of the West. Not necessarily a big fan of Russia, but it can be strategic for the time being. Burkina Faso also started manufacturing electric vehicles domestically, which is insane. Like, imagine buying a car built in Africa. Like, everything we buy is from Europe or Asia, and a few cars in America. But being able to develop cars domestically is huge. And Burkina Faso also began constructing 55 medical centers and 5 ICUs in 2024. Senegal, President Bassirou Faye, elected in 2024, also expelled French troops. They started refining their own oil, and launched their first satellite in August of 2024. Ghana has been very welcome to Diaspora and promoting tourism. Everybody knows about Dirty December, or Dirty December, where everybody goes back. So you're seeing a lot of Pan-African movement, a lot of people from all over the world, Black Americans, Blacks in Europe. Everybody's kind of coming together. So we're starting to see a shift towards unifying Black people worldwide, and that's going to be very instrumental in making sure that Africa maintains its sovereignty. And in South Africa is like one of the worst examples in terms of black people in a white dominated country that have some kind of inferiority complex, like it's tough. White people in South Africa own like a huge, the overall majority of the land, even though they make up a very small percentage of the population. But Julius Malema, who is shifting political discourse, he's the leader of the party that's not in office, but they're already changing and transitioning how they're looking at land and looking to redistribute it. So in general, we're seeing a growing trend of expelling foreign troops, reforming mining contracts, taking control more domestically of African resources. You got the African Continental Free Trade Area, which aims to help facilitate trade between countries on the continent, and just really add value and allow for commerce to happen domestically and in between African countries. So that's why the time is different. The time is now. So if you're looking to invest, I say the timing is perfect, especially America. It's a lot going on over here. I ain't gonna hold you. It's a lot going on, and I'm not saying that America is about to just go kaput or like be a third world country in the next few years, but I think we're starting to see decline of the American superpower that was once like the biggest thing and just ran the world like with impunity. I think we're starting to see that decline, and we're starting to see America lose its power relative to the rest of the world. I think it will still be a superpower, but it just doesn't have as much upside or momentum as it had before. Africa has a lot of upside, a lot of momentum. I think it's great opportunity as far as an emerging market to be able to invest and even live there. So hopefully you got some value out of this. I'm gonna drop the sources of everything into the description so you can take a look for yourself. But yeah, now's the time. Please, if you got some value out of this, like, share, comment, and stay tuned for some of our conversations where we actually talk with people doing business in Africa, and you get real insight onto how business is done and how you can do it for yourself. All right, till next time. Peace.